Thank you very much, and it's a great pleasure to be back in Japan. I've made several visits to Japan over the years. I think the first one was in 1991, so Tokyo has changed a little since then. I can see by just looking out the window. I'm going to talk about British defence industry as requested, but I want to make a general point first, which is that. And which is actually of great significance for defence, that when we think about defence technology, more and more of it is coming from the civil commercial sector. I did try to look at the numbers, and if you go back 30 years or so, then you look at global research and development spending, probably 30% of that was in defence. Yeah. Now it's less than 10%. Yeah. So that 90% that is civil commercial, there's a challenge for the defence world to understand what's happening, to understand which of it might be useful for defence, and then to get access to it, to get companies that have got that to provide it to you. So I think, and that aspect spins into the UK defence scene as well as it does into everybody else's. Now, just a few words first. First of all, compared with Japan, our industry has had a kind of, in some ways, a continuous existence. It's never been closed down. If you go to BAE Systems or you go to Babcock, they can trace their continuous activity in a field back to before into the 19th century. Yeah, we got plenty. So we've never had to close down and start again. But and unlike as the case in Japan and in Germany, Italy, and so on. But there has been considerable change in that period because defense budgets move up and down with times of war and times of crisis and more prosperous times, more peaceful times. Also, and this actually is a significant point that I'm kind of working on. I haven't just throw it at you, that defense projects, as we all know, are multi-year projects. They have existences and they're planned over decades, and certainly a decade, and yet defense budgets are fixed on an annual basis. Now, our American speaker knows full well that the US Armed Forces only get their budget 6 months after that financial year has started. Ours get it a bit before that, a couple of months before the financial year, but they work on annual budgets, whereas the projects are big things. Yeah. And so the implications of that annuality in funding is a big factor in UK procurement. We've always had a big range of changes in defence budgets. During the Cold War, and the last 20 years of the Cold War, the UK spent 5% of its GDP on defence all the time. And the economy grew at 2% a year pretty consistently through that period. But going back to that 5% would be a real disruption now. We've got the moving limits on defence budgets. We've also got this tendency, which if you don't know about Augustine's law, then have a look at it, Google it and see what it means. But basically, Norman Augustine was an American industrialist who also worked in government. And he pointed out that as you go from one generation of equipment to the next generation of equipment, one tank to the next tank, the real cost increased by about 3 times in that intergeneration. And that applied, he did it with aircraft, but it pretty much applies across defense platforms. There's an effort to break it now and to flatten it, but it's something that obviously affects defense industry. What's happened as a result in British defence industry, that there have been dozens of company changes. A few companies have gone out of business, but more often they've been bought up either by other buyers, and their businesses have been absorbed into other and wider entities. There have been lots of mergers and consolidation. There is, I will tell you, in BA Systems, I'm looking for, there is in one of their, where they have their kind of, collection of documents. There's one poster that would go most of the way, it would certainly go halfway across this room, and it shows all the acquisitions that they've made since 1900, and there are dozens of them, yeah? So we got many, lots of mergers and consolidations. Now, some of those have been within the UK. In other words, British company buying a British company. But the UK has been more open to foreign direct investment in our defence sector than any country that I know. And there have been lots of foreign investments, including takeovers, either by European companies, to a certain extent by US companies, and even a little bit from other companies. Yeah, I am fond of saying to a European audience that the UK has the most European defence industry in Europe, which, of course, for people who think that UK is not part of Europe is interesting. But Airbus, Thales, Leonardo, these are amongst the really major defence. When I say defence companies in the UK, they do development work. They are a centre for intellectual property generation as well as production. So we have a very strong European dimension to our industry. Some American firms are here, are in the UK fairly big time, some at a rather nominal basis, but General Dynamics are quite big in the UK, as they are in other parts of Europe. So Lockheed Martin in the UK is a presence. Northrop Grumman, mainly actually, Northrop Grumman are in the UK, but most of their work is in cyber. So it's with the security agencies and the police and so on, rather than defence. But we have US companies in the UK that present themselves as British. And then we've got, as I say, a few others that actually Elbit are moving into the UK and Saab are moving into the UK. So we have quite a few, a very heavy element of foreign direct investment. Some companies have gone out of business, but it's quite a small number. Usually somebody buys it up. One of the trends that we are concerned about is that some of the purchases have been made not by other major defence companies, but by private venture, private capital companies who usually want to do something with it, sell and change it and sell it somewhere else, and don't have a long-term view for their ownership. But so there are rather few departures. One of the big topics, and our topic is collaboration. The UK has got extensive experience with collaborative development and production. It dates back to the 1960s. The armed forces especially went into it with reluctance. Sometimes industry went into it with reluctance, said, no, we want to do it on our own. It's easier to do it on our own. But there is a very long list of major collaborative projects, including aircraft. GCAP is the third generation of combat collaborative aircraft. Lots of helicopters done mainly with the French, but also with the Italians. Missiles I can't count, because most of our missiles for more than 20 years have anyway been produced by MBDA, which is a multinational joint venture. So there's lots of them. We're moving into land systems with the Boxer program. I could tell you lots of horror stuff, but Boxer is a program mainly with Germany and Netherlands, but it's a wheeled vehicle, which is got a modular nature. There was discussion of modular. It really is modular. You can just take the top off and put another top on. You can take in a very short period, but it is quite heavy and it's quite expensive. But we've gone back into, we joined that program, left, and have now gone back in again. But there's a new cannon with France. We're chasing mines, sea mines, in collaboration with France. The A400M collaborative aircraft, that's a large aircraft that we do. So there are just lots of collaborative projects with which the UK's got experience. What I think, we recognize that a lot of those projects were not particularly well managed, but in particular how decisions were reached. And there are different ways of managing collaborative projects. The Meteor missile, which some of you will be familiar with, is a collaborative project with several partners, and it's managed through the UK Ministry of Defence, which has a team in the Ministry of Defence managing that program. That team has got representatives from all the partner and countries in it, but it's actually located in the Ministry of Defence. Typhoon was probably, the most, a bit like Tornado, that you had a special purpose company set up, a bit like Edgewing, it is the company for GCAP. And you had a multinational agency, which is the JIGO, but equivalent to that. But the problem with managing Typhoon was that those central bodies didn't have any real decision-making power. They were pretty much post offices. I've got to slow down speaking, because somebody would say, I think we could change this design for this part and paint it green. And so then they would ask the other four partners in the industrial body, say, is it all right if we change this and paint it green? And eventually they'd say, yeah, it's a good idea to change it and paint it green. So then they would go to the NATO body, to the governmental body, and they'd say, we'd like to change this part and paint it green. Is that all right? And that body would say, I don't know. I will have to ask London. I'll have to ask. So eventually, you can change it and paint it green. But months have passed, yeah? Whereas the idea for GCAP is very much that those central bodies will be empowered to decide how that program should, those sorts of technical things get managed, and we hope that will transform the nature of the management of the program. But there is not one way to manage a collaborative program. Yeah, there are lots. The picture there, by the way, is an A400M taking off in a very short space of time. I've seen it. It's a very powerful aircraft. What's the current situation? Well, we have a limited number of national, in inverted commas, national champions. They're the automatic go-to, and they are de facto monopolies in their field. And they are, the government increasingly uses the word partnering or partner for its relationship with these companies. What I say to these companies is that they have two characteristics. On the one hand, they are commercial entities that need to make a profit and have to keep their shareholders happy. But on the other hand, they're virtually state agencies. They have to carry out the wishes of the government, and they have to respond. And we have plenty of instances of that working. Many of the people that work in these entities are very committed to the armed forces that they support. But it is an interesting, you're an agency of the state, but you're a commercial entity. And this is, even though their shares are bought and sold on the stock market. Those names are probably, I think, familiar to most people in this room. Munitions, in some areas of these monopolies, the government has chosen to make multi-year commitments and contracts to their products. We've just done it again in half an hour. I can tell you the details afterwards if you like. But for munitions, for things like artillery ammunition and regular munitions, the government signs 10-year contracts for what these companies are going to do. And everybody knows that the terms, there is flexibility within those contracts. And obviously the Ukraine effect has been felt. We have a similar sort of 10-year, 12-year arrangement with complex weapons with MBDA. Yeah. And that actually has been renewed twice. That was put in place in 2005. So it's quite durable. And although government occasionally says, these things are too expensive, can't you make them cheaper? The missiles that they produced actually work, and they're useful, which is quite a handy attribute. So in some areas, we have, as I say, these long-term contracts, and they're in the hands of national monopolies. There is a recognition of the value of defense industry for defense capability and for defense resilience and its strategic significance, which several other speakers have mentioned today, that this is how their governments are viewing defense. It's necessary for effective defense and for assured defense. And that's been recognized in the UK. It wasn't always recognized in the UK. Even in 2012, we had a government that said the default means of procurement will be by competition from the world market. Yeah, that was 2012. Yeah. There were some exceptions to that, but that's what they said. You wouldn't get that statement today. What is interesting for anybody who's a procurement person, an ATLA type person, if you like, is that the government is now has actually accepted a much wider definition of the nature of value. No, value for money is a terrible term, because nobody can say, I'm not interested in value for money. Value for money is important, isn't it? You can't say it isn't important. But when you say, well, what is value for money? That's a different question. Because value for money as an idea, as you know from, let's look at the array of ties in the room, yeah? Value for money is a personal matter, and it's, so it's personal. When you look at defense equipment, it's also multidimensional, even in terms of cost. You've got, what about the acquisition cost, but what about the through life cost, which is usually much greater, doesn't get as much attention. And then you've got, where you sit in society. If you sit in the UK, if you sit in Barrow, you think that which is where the submarines are built, you think submarines are very important and great value for money. If you sit in the city of London, you might think, well, it doesn't look like value for me because I have to pay more tax to pay for these things. So it's a subjective idea, it's a multidimensional idea, and it actually changes over time, depending on where you are. If you want a sort of nice, is there anybody in this room that doesn't know what the Houses of Parliament look like? Yeah, I suspect there isn't anybody. The Houses of Parliament in London, the Palace of Westminster, it's about the most famous building in the world. It was really late and over budget, but now it's considered national treasure. Yeah, so, and you can do this, the defense equivalent, I think it's fair to say, is a C-17. Yeah, as I remember the C-17, it was late and over budget, and now it's a national treasure. So value really difficult. But what I wanted to say about how the UK government as a whole is now, whereas before they did it on, does it meet the requirements? Was it on time? Did it cost what they said it would cost, which is basic stuff. They're now recognizing that defense industry is is about impacting on the economy, which everybody knows, but it's been reluctant to talk about. It impacts on your foreign relationships. It even impacts in the UK on the unity of the country, because Scotland is very interested in how much defence work it gets, and we have a Scottish independence movement that has to be kept at bay. It's not the only thing on the agenda, but it's an element there. So it's openly a multinational, a multi-dimensional thing, value. If there's a document called the Land Industrial Strategy, which you can find on the web, and that has a diagram in there of all the things that have to be taken into account when you're thinking about value. It's much more complicated than it used to be. But the great trend is that the word partnering is now coming up more and more, and the strategic importance of defence industry is recognised. In line with that, there are now quite a number of sector strategies that were published under the previous governments, and they cover combat air, shipbuilding, land systems, space, and now even artificial intelligence. There is also, defence industrial strategies as a whole. One that was done in 2021. First one was 2005, but the new government's put a new one in place, and it all emphasises the sort of the importance of defence industry, the value to the economy, what it does for the UK overall. Sitting inside the sort of national champions, the big ones that everybody's heard of, is that there's great governmental faith in the innovative capability of the agility of small businesses and new businesses. But they have to be, what I would emphasize is that what these innovative firms offer has to be able to be innovated into big platforms. One of our earlier speakers says, the big thing is who's the systems integrator, yeah? Because they have to go into big platforms, and that can be a really sort of major issue. But even the simplest things to integrate are things that a soldier can carry. But you then have to take into account how much is a soldier already carrying. I don't know about the Japanese infantry, but I know that British infantry were in Iraq and Afghanistan. If they had to walk, they carried they were north of 120 pounds, 70, 80 kilos on their back. So you want to just add anything into a 70 kilo pack, and it's a serious thing. So the integration challenge is there for mechanical and human platforms. I think with particularly, there was the diagram that you showed about modular systems that were replaceable here. There are some things that we're increasingly recognize that just as with artificial intelligence, the world of artificial intelligence has woken up to the fact that we will need a lot more power stations because it uses electricity. Well, it's the same with defense. How much electricity you can get onto a platform determines what things you can put onto it. But there is this innovation emphasis on getting small businesses into defense. Most of the British defence firms, all the British defence firms that I know, practice, going to the top right point there, they practice what in management terms is sometimes called core competence thinking. In other words, the core competence thinking, I don't know what you don't know, as it were, but core competence thinking says no organisation to be good at everything. So what commercial organisations that want to be successful should do is concentrate on the few things where they can excel and get the other things that they need from somebody else that is excelling in that particular field. That's core competence thinking. The outcome of that is that the small businesses and the medium-sized enterprise businesses that the government wants to get into defense, there are already hundreds, actually thousands of those in defense supply chains already. Yeah. When I was preparing a piece of evidence before I left for a parliamentary committee, who were asking about defense industry, and I offer it to you. I said, we know where defense industry is at the top. We know the top, but we don't know the bottom, because we don't know the supply chains. There are people making things in defense equipment who do not know that what they're making is going into defense equipment. Yeah. So when we're trying to pin down this defense industry, it's really quite tricky. I say we know where it starts, we don't know where it ends, and that's not likely to change. So there are lots of the national champions. There are half a dozen of those, but there are hundreds, thousands of companies that are working for them and are used to so doing. Exports, the current government is very keen on exports. For the first time, for one reason or another, we've often said that, governments have often said that, but they've not practiced it. But now we are recognizing that exports have to be taken into account in the requirements formulation phase, and in the things that we offer to potential customers in terms of government support. I was speaking to your senior official, Japanese senior official at lunchtime that I knew from when she was in London. But we recognize that defense exports have a strong political dimension. The UK's main established market is in the Gulf, and a lot of combat air systems and missiles have been bought there. But UK missile sales are to a much larger world. I think MBDA tell me their totals. I don't keep it running, but many years, MBDA UK exports more than it makes for the British market. And that's true also of some Thales systems, missiles in Northern Ireland. So we sell missiles around the world, and we've got a habit of selling naval vessels that are aged to, particularly in Latin America, to Chile and Brazil, for historical reasons that I cannot begin to explain to you. But it was to do with basically a corrupt British admiral who helped with the creation of Chile as an independent state in the 19th century. That's called Cochrane, if you're interested. But the Chilean Navy and the Royal Navy still have close links that date back to Admiral Cochrane. He was a big hero in Chile, even though he was thrown out of the Royal Navy before then. But there is that retired naval vessels. But in recent last few years, we've had a lot of success, or much more success, with naval vessels. So the Type 26, our Australian colleagues know that's been sold to Australia and Canada, or it's being made in those countries. Type 31 is, the Type 26 has just been bought by Norway. It's probably the best anti-submarine ship that's available at the minute, and it has some intriguing features. The size of the piping that carries water around the ship is very small, so that water moving around the ship doesn't make a noise, so other ships can't hear it. But it's just one of those things that, as a layperson, you would never think of. The Type 31 is a cheaper and more basic warship, and that's been sold to Poland, probably to Indonesia. Denmark's very interested. Seems to be a very functional vessel. So exports, and for the first time, really, that we've got a whole of government support for exports. It's never been completely transformative. What we've seen is the defense industry has gone from complacent to, I think, very concerned with competitiveness. Its significance for government has really gone up, and the UK has got a lot of experience in collaborative projects. I think everybody in the UK is delighted with the GCAP program and seeing what comes from that, because we hope that this will not be the end of the story. I think UK industry views Japan as another collaborative partner. Some of the previous speakers, and I'll finish here, some of the previous speakers have said, you know, you want trusted partners. Yeah, you're in this for a 20, 30-year time. And there aren't many countries with the technology and the trust and the resource to do collaborative work with. And the fact that Japan's now in the club, as it were, is really rewarding and makes life in the UK easier in the eyes of the British government. That's for me for now. I just looked at my watch, probably a minute over time. Thank you.